This person, without naming them, I can't remember their username, reviewed the game, said the game was great. They recommended it. They gave it a thumbs up on Steam's reviews things. They totally recommended it, said, oh, it was a scary horror game and oh, it was so immersive and all that sort of thing. But Steam now has this thing where it shows if someone's refunded the game as well in their review. So this person was recommending a game, enjoyed it, completed it, but still asked for a refund.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the One Story Building podcast, the storytelling podcast where storytellers tell the stories about how they make stories. Perfect. So I was at the 2021 Perth's Game Festival the other day, searching for a game that involved a story, and I found absolutely none of them except one, made by Lee right here. It's called Courier Tale. Is that right? Courier Tale?
Courier Tale, yep.
Perfect. And I thought I'd get him on here to talk about games and storytelling in games. So Lee, the first question is, of course, what made you start making games?
It's interesting. Like I've been a gamer all my life, and that's a common story these days. You know, gaming is the gaming industry now is worth as much as the film and music industry combined now. So it's really the biggest sort of entertainment or creative sort of product out there, really.
Do you have a theory as to why that might be?
Maybe. Well, I think there's multiple reasons why. One, me personally, I consider, and that's part of the reason why been trying to get into game development in recent years, is I can kind of consider it the ultimate art form. Which is interesting to say because it's an art form that's in its infancy, and some people are not comfortable with calling it an art form. They just think, oh, that's just something where you go around shooting monsters or something like that, But games are art. Some are more artistic than others, but that's no different to seeing some dumb blockbuster Hollywood film versus some art house film. You've got both, and that's the same in the games world. And I think the reason why it's the ultimate art form is because it combines everything from every other art form and then adds an extra layer, which is interactivity. So it's very similar to something like film or TV, where you've got, sound design, you've got writing, you've got composition, with like shots or like, the frame of the camera of whatever the game, especially when it's a 3D based game or something, you've got production design, even if it's digitally, so you've got all those elements you might find in film and television, for example, which sometimes are solitary art forms themselves. Like music can be its own art form by itself, but it's a part of gaming, like many other art forms, all combined together to make games. But they all don't have interactivity. I mean, someone like Netflix is flirting with the idea, with doing interactive TV things, pretty much like a choose your own adventure with a TV remote. But
they did that with that Black Mirror Bandersnatch thing, which I thought was okay. Yeah. I think it was a good step to something that's going to be better. It was a good prototype, I think.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see where Netflix goes, because Netflix are actually really trying to get into gaming now, because they would see that the gaming industry is worth more than the industry that they're in, as much as they are the kings of streaming. And like we were talking before this sort of podcast started, how sometimes brand names or products get kind of aligned with a particular thing. And when you think of maybe music streaming, you probably most likely think of something like Spotify. And when you think of sort of TV streaming, you think of Netflix, to the point that people have sayings like Netflix and chill. They don't say Apple TV and chill. They don't say in Australia Stan and chill.
Yeah.
So you can see that they've already obviously dominated the streaming market for TV and film stuff and that. So now they're clearly branching out with gaming, and those interactive TV sort of shows, I think, have been interesting experiments, but I think they can see that there is worth to actually doing more traditional games that just happen to be maybe aligned with their own TV properties, like Stranger Things. There's been a few games out based on, and also, there is some limitations of what you can do with just a TV and a remote control sort of thing. So it's going to be interesting to see what direction they go with that. But yeah, it's just the fact that, yeah, you combine all those art forms together and plus add interactivity. And then that probably leads to the reason why maybe it's starting to become more popular than other art forms is it's more immersive. Like, it puts you in the story. I mean, we're talking about stories today. Most stories you're experiencing on a sort of almost 2D sort of platform. I mean, if you watch a theater production, obviously that's kind of 3D in your face and that, but then you kind of can see, oh, well, there's the curtains and all that. It's not real. This is not really happening. It's just a bunch of people talking on the stage. No offense to theater or anything.
But surely that's part of the fun. Like when you play a video game, you're not truly 100% convinced that you're in the moment, but a bit of the fun is putting in the little bit of effort to get yourself immersed in the product.
Yeah, outside of like virtual reality, which, as much as we're in the really early days of virtual reality, can be ridiculously immersive. Like, that can really make you think you totally lose track of where you are sometimes in virtual reality. Games, I think, are just a bit more easier to immerse yourself in. Okay. I've already talked about the future of games.
Yeah, exactly. I have a question right here that's talking about what do you think the future of non-VR games are, like the ones that you make, when VR's coming in? I mean, why sit at a laptop and play a top-down pixel game like your games when you can put on a headset and be in a world?
Oh, totally. I think there is that risk there, but I think it's probably a long way away still. It's no different to, like, you could argue that books and like other older sort of creative art forms that tell stories are technically dated technology. They're old ways of doing things, but books are selling just as well as they did before. They just might be ebooks sometimes on your phone or in your Kindle or whatever sort of thing. TV is having a bit of a renaissance, really. It's like kind of the golden age of TV, and I feel like is actually doing better than film right now, which who would have thought that you'd be getting TV productions that can rival the production values of films these days. Some of the big sci-fi sort of TV shows now, like, because of the 3D graphics, which would have been a lot due thanks to gaming. And that's the thing, I think there's flow-on effects from gaming to other industries in that. We're getting, something like The Mandalorian, for example, that's shot on like digital backgrounds instead of actually with real sets, and just creates this thing that has the same production values as an actual full-on Star Wars film. And yeah, it's a TV show you can watch on a streaming service and that. So I think, traditional games, if we will be around kind of like books and that are still today these days. But there may be a tipping point at some point where VR becomes convenient enough that people start just living in virtual worlds, essentially. And they might be playing Courier Tale in virtual reality within that space, like on some Star Wars planet, or virtual Star Wars planet or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like it's the problem with VR right now is the technology hasn't completely got there yet. We've still got resolution problems there as far as trying to get it more immersive. There's the convenience factor. I think the Oculus Quest has made a big ways in that, making it a lot more convenient that you can just chuck this headset on. It's relatively lightweight and you don't have to set up a bunch of cables and that sort of thing. I've got a PlayStation VR myself, and there's so many things I would like to play on that, but I often just go, but then I have to set up all these cables and do this and do that. And it takes away from that sort of thing. But
yeah, I get less immersed when I have to hold like big sort of joystick looking things and put a thing on my head. I get less immersed when I'm in the world than when I'm at the computer playing a thing on a screen. I mean, I remember when I was like 10 playing Pokemon games on the Game Boy in like the back of my parents' car. It filled my entire world, even though the screen was like that big. And now when I go back to it, I'm like, what's this Tamagotchi nonsense? How was I was more immersed in like a Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire when I was playing it as a kid than I was playing Skyrim as like an adult.
Yeah, it's definitely lo-fi tech can still immerse you. Like I said, man, again, people can get totally drawn into a book, and you're having to imagine the visuals of what's being said in that. So it's not that lo-fi tech can't do that, but I feel like, we've had various, tipping points, and like where like smartphones kind of took over the world, and the internet kind of took over the world, and social media took over the world, and I've actually just been thinking recently, like, what is going to be that next big thing that just completely consumes the life of the world, and virtual
VR.
reality will get there eventually.
Yeah.
I wonder if actually the bridging point is actually going to be AR. We're getting pretty close that, even though there was Google Glass like about 5 years ago or more, we're getting closer to companies like Apple and that, and Facebook actually just dropped some smart glasses. They're just basically cameras in some Ray-Bans, but they're like a first step towards AR glasses. And I think we'll be experiencing the world through AR glasses sometime this decade, where if you want to find where to go something, you just go, hey, Google or whatever, where's the train station? And then it'll just give you directions on your glasses, and you can see the directions in front of you. And that in some ways is really going to probably replace the phone, which we're so obsessed with having in our hand all the time. But as soon as you can just have that in your face projected in front of you as you go along, which is not that far away, I think that might be the bridging part where we're already starting to virtualize our real world. And then once the technology's there, as far as resolution, the convenience of just putting on this thing. And like you're saying, you're interacting with VR right now with really clunky controllers, these big things. It's actually quite good for Beat Saber because on PSVR, the actual controls, the move controls are almost like sabers. So that feels really immersive. But generally what you want to be having is maybe putting on some gloves or just having some cameras track your hands, like I think some VR headsets are already starting to do, so that you're just making normal human interactions. Probably gloves might be better because you might be able to get some sort of force feedback, so you can actually feel that you're touching things and stuff like that. And and then it's going to be interesting, someone like storytelling within VR, when we're spending so much time in it. If you can think of now how much time we spend on the internet, just, scrolling through social media feeds and stuff like that, can you imagine if we transfer that to virtual reality in, say, 20, 40 years time? People will be not told to get off their phone, they'll be told to get out of virtual reality.
Yeah.
That's always been the long-term sci-fi sort of, I don't know if it's dream or dystopia, but I think it will eventually come. We're just in those early pioneering stages. And I think that's what people forget about with games as well, is that games in video games as such are still massively in their infancy. They haven't been around for that long, 50 odd years or so in a more public mainstream sense, when like early arcade machines came along, early consoles and stuff like that, text adventures on personal computers and stuff. This 50 years is nothing in the grand scheme of things,
Yeah, I don't think games have reached half of their potential. And what I'm worried about is that VR is going to take over the gaming's industry before non-VR games have really hit their peak.
Yeah, I think, well, this is the thing, because we're in essentially the pioneering stages of virtual reality, I think people are still trying to figure out how you even do things in VR at this point, And I haven't played something like Half-Life Alyx, but I imagine that's probably done pretty well in nailing things. And there's been a few experiences that have been pretty amazing virtual reality that I've had. I remember playing Batman Arkham VR on my PSVR, was one of the first VR games I played in that. And I know it was just like a cartoony Gotham City and that sort of thing, but man, it felt really good. Like, it was like, holy crap, I'm in Arkham City sort of thing. And even more amazing was No Man's Sky. I'd already played No Man's Sky on PC, but then when I tried it out on PSVR, holy crap, PlayStation VR has such a low resolution. Like, you can really see, like, they call it the sort of screen door effect sort of thing. You can really see the interlacing and that, like, and the pixels and that sort of thing. But despite that, like, oh, that was so immersive. I have not had really much of a better experience than taking off in a spaceship off an alien planet in No Man's Sky and just flying up into space. Well, actually, that wasn't such a great experience. I did play, there was a Battlefront Star Wars mission for VR, for PSVR. I played that, but I only lasted about 7 minutes before I had to stop, because that's another issue with virtual reality at this point, is motion sickness. And it's interesting, like, we might want to progress into these sort of virtual worlds and that, but our bodies are not necessarily adapted to it yet necessarily. There's people that, because if you're sitting down on your couch, like flying around a spaceship in space, but you're actually sitting on your couch, or if you're running in a game, but you're sitting down. Like I played Skyrim VR once, and like if you're sitting down, but your character's running, your brain's just like melting down, going, what's happening? I feel like I'm walking forward, but I'm actually sitting down. Like
even when you've got a sword and you're about to, and you hit someone and they deflect your sword with like their shield or whatever, your hand keeps going, but the sword twangs off it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of these things that are problems that still need to be solved. Something like, being able to run in a game. There's like these massively complicated setups. I've seen one at PAX once, and that where like you have like basically a running treadmill that you can run in different directions. Most people are probably not going to have that in their households, but maybe there's something that's more condensed down and smarter later on down the track that the technology might be able to help that immersive experience. But it's no different to like when the first caveman or whatever sort of thing painted something or draw something like that. The comparison of the art form then to now is so different, sort of thing. But yeah, in those pioneering years, you're just experimenting, and I think that's what makes it exciting. Is that whether it's virtual reality or gaming, when you're in those pioneering years, there's that room to experiment. There isn't a formula so much yet, and you can just try out different things and see what works. And some things are going to work, some things aren't going to work, and some things are going to have an audience, and some things are going to have a different audience. And maybe virtual reality takes off first in something like the business world or something like that instead, where people will have virtual meetings from working remotely and stuff like that. I feel like COVID has really fast-tracked this idea of people working from home and working remotely where able to. And I think, that's probably advanced us a few years earlier into that direction than we would have otherwise. So yeah, interesting times ahead as far as virtual reality goes.
Well, I have to ask, when did you yourself start making games? And actually, what were some of your favorite games growing up that got you into games? And before you even answer, that's the third last question. I'm literally going up my
we're going in reverse
list of questions. Okay. Yeah.
See, this is how
the last question I ask will be, how are you? That isn't there. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So like, what were some of your favorite games, and when did you start making your own?
So my favorite games, I guess I started off probably as a sort of Sega kid.
You mean Sega?
Well,
well, that's it, isn't it? Sega. That's
the classic way. But maybe it's the Ocker way of saying it's Sega, like Sega. Like I don't know. My pronunciation of words is not always the greatest anyway. But you're correct. That Sega is so classic.
Well, the Australian way would be Saiga, like Saiga.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it probably depends on what country you're in as to how you exactly pronounce it. But I guess Sega or Sega were kind of giving it away in that sort of intro thing with like Sonic the Hedgehog running by or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think I got a Commodore 64 first or something like that. But then it was the Sega Master System and Mega Drive in particular that really, I think, grabbed me. It's interesting now because I didn't have access to Nintendo consoles until I got like a Game Boy, and really late in the game, I got a Super Nintendo towards the end of its lifespan. But I've more started to appreciate old Nintendo games nowadays because I didn't get to play them back when I was a kid and that. But I was massive on Master System and Mega Drive. I really enjoyed in particular, the Wonder Boy series, not so much the original arcade sort of one, but the more RPG sort of action adventure ones. which was like the second and third one. Well, it's actually quite confusing because there's like about 2 or 3 different Wonder Boy 3s out there, and they're different games and different naming conventions.
Did you say an RPG? There was an RPG back then. How could you make a role-playing game on such archaic tech? I didn't get it.
Well, that actually, I would say it's technically probably an action adventure. I mean, there definitely was RPGs back then. There was like, your Final Fantasies or whatever, the early ones and that sort of thing with turn-based combat and stuff like that. I never really got into those, I don't think, but I liked the action adventure sort of ones that kind of included like some platforming, some puzzling. But they did have some small, it was almost like RPG light sort of elements where you could, upgrade your character by buying some armor or something like that at the local at the shop there or whatever, or get some new ability to change to a different sort of character. Like in Wonder Boy 3, you could change into different characters, like from like to a dragon or a mouse or something like that, and that would help you solve different puzzles and stuff like that by using different character sort of modes. So yeah, I think that was probably some of the earliest ones in that. And I was pretty much a Sega kid. I've dabbled with a bit of Sega. Nintendo and that sort of thing.
Sorry.
Sega.
Get it right.
I mean, talking about RPGs, more of an action RPG, the one that really stuck with me, and I called my favorite game of all time for a while there, but I never completed it, was Secret of Mana. I actually pretty much got a Super Nintendo just for Secret of Mana, and that's the only game I ever had for it. Because games were expensive back then, and you normally had to rent games instead from the video store. That does not exist anymore.
Oh, the good old days.
I don't know if it's good old days, but it's probably better now because you can get access to cheap or even free games these days. While back then, like the best you could get was like a free demo on a magazine or something like that, which is something that I really did a lot with.
Well, maybe I couldn't afford the game. It was the scarcity. It was the scarcity of your selection that made you appreciate what you were getting.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's, I think, one of the big challenges I think going into like game development now is you've got a bigger audience potential than ever, but you're competing against more games than ever by far, like so much more. It makes it really hard to be able to stand out. And you're also competing with people's attention spans. Now, like I think about it when like I give a present to a kid, and they'll get like 20 presents and you see them just open present, go, oh, cool. And then just chuck it and go open the next present. Oh, cool. Chuck it. And that sort of thing. While if I think back to, and I don't want to get on that old man background, our day, we only had one game, but that was literally it. Like I had one game. You'd get one game at Christmas or something like that, or your birthday. And then I just had to dream about the other games by reading magazine articles about these cool games. And like the best thing you could do was get like a shareware version of it or a demo on a front page of disc, or you'd go and rent a game. But the thing is, if the game was a long RPG, for example, like that goes for 40 hours and wastes a whole lot of your time grinding and stuff like that, that was going to cost you a lot to rent that to ever complete it, sort of thing. But also even the short games, which when I went back, because I retro collect old consoles these days, when I went back to games like sort of something like Alex Kidd and Miracle World on Sega Master System, those games, when you actually look at how long they're supposed to take to beat, are only like 2 hours long or 3 hours long, which is really interesting in conversation now where people argue that if a game's like under a few hours long or something like that, it's not a game or it's not good value or something like that, when they're focusing on quantity over quality time with a game. But yeah, the thing with those old school games, if they were really short games, they made them ridiculously hard. So even though if you just played it perfectly, it would only take you maybe a couple of hours, if that, to complete the game. But they made it so ridiculously hard. Like Alex Kidd and Miracle World is a perfect example. When I picked up a new Master System for my collection, I thought, oh yeah, finally play Alex Kidd and Miracle World. And I got like 2/3 through the game. And then I lost a paper, scissors, rock battle, which is completely chance-based, basically. You can't do anything about it. You just choose something and hope it's like rolling a dice, basically. And I lost 3 matches against a person, and that killed me. And then I had to go back to the start of the game. It wasn't like you just went back to the start of the battle or back to the start of the level. You went right back to the start of the game. So games were designed back then to be short but last a very long time. It's the same when if you played old arcade machines, it's all about extracting coins out of you to keep playing. And if you played some of the old school beat 'em up games like The Simpsons or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and that, the only way you were going to be affordably able to complete one of those was to get 4 people, do a time zone super session where you get locked in for 2 hours and you all just played that one game for 2 hours straight, because every boss you went up against in that took like 1,000 hits, and it was because if you died, then they could get another coin out of you. So I think design of games has actually evolved since then as well. But it feels like it's almost coming back with free-to-play and microtransactions. Are almost going back to those old arcade game mentalities of trying to find ways to keep nickel and diming you over and over by just progressively making things harder to enjoy.
I also think that's what achievements have done, and now for the most part do. It's like when you complete the tutorial on a Steam game and it's like, ding, you completed it. It's not an achievement. It's just saying, here's a token in an ocean of tokens. Like I've had games that I've played a lot and I have gotten all of the achievements, and then as soon as I'm done with the achievements, I never touch the game again. And that's kind of grim thinking about
how they trick you. There's trophy hunters.
Staying. Yeah. I don't do that anymore.
I don't think there's anything wrong with the trophy hunting thing and the achievement thing, as long as it's not like in respect to trying to get more money out of you. I feel like, some people might just play through the game and then go, okay, maybe I'll go back and 100% it. And it gives you another reason to replay things. And I think, unfortunately, and I say this as someone who does Twitch streaming myself, in this day and age, games actually have to find a way to be replayable. And that's, I think, in some ways detrimental to the art form, because most other mediums can be just linear. They can be just a one-time experience and you just pay your money and that's it. And it was this amount of time and nowhere near as long as a lot of games are. And you'd say, oh, well, I got my money's worth in that. But now, like a streamer or a YouTube content creator and that can play your game, which can be great for exposure if you're making a roguelike that can be infinitely replayable in that. But if you're making a short linear story-based game, then you're at risk at people just watching the story for 2 hours and that, like as if they watched a movie on YouTube, something like that's been pirated or something like that. And then they go, oh, well, I've seen the ending. I know what happens in the game. I don't need to buy the game anymore. I don't need to play the game anymore. So
even if they like it or respect it more than a roguelike that they played for hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
I'm
and that's the thing,
that.
like those short games actually respect your time. They kind of present themselves like, hey, we know you're here for a good time, not a long time. And especially as you get older, you more appreciate shorter games and that. And unfortunately, there's just there's been this change in mentality, I feel, with people, because I guess we've all grown, especially younger generations now, growing up with experiencing games through YouTubers, Twitch streamers, and so forth, and that they just expect, oh yeah, I just watch a game. Like some kids will just want to watch Minecraft streams over and over and over, or whatever, or Fortnite streams over and over, and that's all they do, sort of thing. That's like their new TV. They're not going there to get a review of a game or something like that. Like if I watched like a TV show that was reviewing games or something like that, it's a very different experience to someone just playing a game over and over. But not all games are replayable, and I'm concerned that because of that, because of the return on investment for people that are making more linear story-driven games, short ones, in particular for indie developers who are most vulnerable to this, that it could force people to just always be making games that are just supposed to last hundreds of hours, even if they're not that good, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I'd hate to see quality, short, curated experiences, sometimes people complain, oh, wow, I went to this film and it went for 3 hours long. I can't believe how long it was. It should have only been 2 hours. It was way too long. You say that in the gaming world and people are like, well, neither of those are too long. They should be like 40 hours long or 100 hours long or something like that. Otherwise, I'm not getting my money's worth, no matter what price you put it at. Like, even if you're only charging $5 for a game and that, if someone plays it for like an hour, and they'll feel sometimes that some people feel like they've been ripped off somehow because it only went for an hour or two or something like that. And something was really kind of concerning I saw recently was there was this indie sort of story-driven game. I think it was a story-driven game, and it was like about an hour and a half long. And on Steam, there's a refund policy that you can refund any game automatically as long as you've played it for less than 2 hours. So the problem for indie games that are less than 2 hours, that someone can go through the whole game, complete it, and then ask for their money back, even if they enjoyed it. And this was the thing that showed the hypocrisy of this sort of refund process, is that this person, without naming them, I can't remember their username, reviewed the game, said the game was great. They recommended it. They gave it a thumbs up on Steam's reviews things. They totally recommended it, said, oh, it was a scary horror game and oh, it was so immersive and all that sort of thing. But Steam now has this thing where it shows if someone's refunded the game as well in their review. So this person was recommending a game, enjoyed it, completed it, but still asked for a refund. That is what I think indie developers are battling against. And it sucks because some of the best indie games, or games in general, are short games as far as I'm concerned. Journey is a masterpiece, and that's only a few hours long. A game that quite influenced Courier Tale that I'm making, A Short Hike, is about an hour and a half long, and that's an amazing little game, and won a whole bunch of awards. Well, both of those games won a heap of awards. Yet A Short Hike, under Steam's Save refund policy, could be refunded after someone's completed it. So, and you wouldn't walk into a cinema, watch all of the latest Star Wars film, and then go walk out and go, hey, can I have my money back? It was a great film, but I want my money back.
I would walk out and ask my money back.
I nearly did. I nearly would have considered that for episode 9, but
yeah.
But I don't think it's anywhere as prevalent. You don't get an automatic refund by just like pressing an email button or whatever sort of thing and getting a refund from the film you watched or the TV show you watched or the book you read or something like that. Like, can you imagine someone reading all the way through a book and go, I did not like that story. I want my $20, $30 back, you know? But then also, I guess maybe there's also that side that with digital stuff, you can't on-sell something. So if you bought it and there was no demo to try it out in the first place, which can be hard for shorter indie games to make a demo. That was a challenge for me for Perth Games Festival. Was how much of the game do I show at this point? Because I don't want to give away, because my game is quite a short game. I'm expecting it to be about 3 to 5 hours long. I think it's a big challenge, and it sucks because, you can watch a 2.5 hour film and that's a masterpiece and totally worth your money sort of thing and that, but you play a game for that long, and a lot of people are still of that mentality of like, oh, well, then that's not a game. Like I had someone say to me recently, I was like, what, really? And that was someone that's developing a game said that to me recently. And I was like, really? You think just because a game is like shorter than a couple of hours, they called it an interactive fiction rather than a game. I think those sort of mindsets will eventually evolve, just like we were talking about, like with things like VR and stuff like that. I think eventually, as games have become more and more mainstream, I think people are becoming more open to different experiences. And I think especially when people get older and realize time is precious, that you'll suddenly say, hey, I want to play that 3-hour game rather than that 30-hour game because I haven't got time. I want to play a game over a weekend or a night or something like that, instead of thinking I have to sink in the next 2 months trying to get all these different little collectibles or something like that for over 100-hour RPG.
That's why I was drawn to your game. I mean, when I went to the 2021 Perth Games Festival, I was searching for a game that had some focus on story, and almost all the games that I saw, it was just some variant of hit the thing and get a point. And then I saw your game, I saw Courier Tale, I saw the art style, and it was so I've played the demo, and it's so humorous and dry, and I just really like it, and I will play it. So I mean, what really just tell us about Courier Tale. Why did you make it, and how did you submit it to the Games Festival and to Steam?
Well, I think first tackling the sort of thing you've said about like Perth Games Festival. It's not specific to Perth Game Festival, but you're like saying, oh, I was looking for a story-driven game and Courier Tale was the only option, which, like, hey, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's why it felt like it did actually demo really well at Perth Games Festival. But I wonder if people that are making story-driven games don't actually necessarily demo them at conventions, because generally I've found from my experience with conventions and games festival things and that sort of thing is that a story-driven game doesn't demo well in a public space like that. And it's no fault of the event or anything like that. It's just the nature of it that it's more, you can just go, if there's like a multiplayer party game that has 4 people jumping around shooting each other or something like that, and 4 people can play at the same time instead of just one. You can get a bunch of people, have some fun, laugh with each other and that, and have a social experience and that sort of thing, and enjoy that. And it's very instantly rewarding. Like you can play it for like 30 seconds. You already know, like if you're playing a more arcade-like game, oh, I know how this game plays. I know what you do in this game, So you get that instant sort of reward and experience. And you could probably pick it up for a minute or so and then walk off and move on to the next game and that. And you already know what to expect from that game. I think those games demo really well at conventions. I don't know if they do so well later on when actually releasing a game, because trying to get a bunch of people in the same room to play a game together is a lot harder than being at a convention and you're already in that mode and you're doing that once, but are you going to do that repetitively? I don't know. That's why I guess online multiplayer matchmaking has made a lot of difference for those sort of games. But a story-driven game doesn't demo so well in those spaces, because you're asking someone to try and block out all the noise around them and all people moving around and all the colors and flashing lights and stuff like that, and just kind of immerse yourself in this thing. It's like kind of like if you went to like some massive event and there's people talking and all that. Can you imagine just going into the middle there, putting a chair down and sitting down and reading a book in the middle of all that? Mm-hmm. It doesn't work. So, I mean, that's part of the reason why I had to have headphones there, because it's part of like trying to immerse you, kind of like the virtual reality thing is trying to disconnect you from the reality of what's going on around you and get people to sit down for 10 to 15 minutes, not 1 minute, but 10 to 15 minutes to play through the demo. So the demo kind of ends on, I guess, a hint to what the rest of the game is going to be about, and there's something weird that happens at the end. And I always debated about, what do I mention about this animal person you see? Like when I put up the Steam page for recently, like about a couple of weeks prior to the Games Festival. I did that so I could make sure that people could wish list it and that sort of thing. Otherwise, it's a bit of a waste of time to take that opportunity to promote the game and go, oh, when's it going to be online that I can not keep following it? And then people don't know where to go for it, and then you lose that traction. But I wondered, do I even mention like the cat person, for example, the cat people? And it's like, well, that is supposed to be kind of like a surprise of the game, but it's also the attraction to the game for some people. I mean, literally on Steam, when you send up the Steam page, one of the tags you can put on there is cats or dogs. So if people are searching for cats and dogs, you can have that as a tag for your game if your game happens to feature cats or dogs. So I thought, well, actually, lots of people like cats and dogs and that sort of things and want to play games that feature them in some sort of way. So I kind of have to give away something there to kind of entice people enough into it. But luckily, it's not giving away everything about the game. So that was the thing with designing the demo. There was nothing to do with the demo. Like the demo was just the start of the game. All it was deciding where to cut it off. And it was both, I thought that was a good kind of cliffhanger, if you will, to cut it off at. But it was also thinking specifically about the convention festival sort of space. I can't make a half an hour or hour-long demo. Otherwise, I'd only get through like 5 people through the whole day. The game festival was only 6 hours long. So you got to think about how many people you can churn through, especially when I only had one setup that time. But next year, I'll probably have 2 setups going so we can try and churn through more people. And that's very different to like doing, say, a Steam Next Fest game festival demo or something like that, where anywhere around the world, people can download it. They can play it whenever they want during that time period and that. and they can spend as long as they want. They could spend 2 hours in a demo and it wouldn't matter. There's not someone waiting impatiently behind them, like going, oh, I really want to play this game, but there's someone still playing it, sort of thing. So I had to keep in mind the length as well for the demo. So it's enough to grab people's attention, hopefully, and have create some intrigue and interest in what the game is doing, but also and leave them hanging for some more. But also not too long that someone could spend half an hour on there, and then I only get like the input, like the feedback from one person, and so it's that weird balance. And if I release an online demo later on, which I probably will sometime next year, maybe that might be a bit longer, or maybe it'll be exactly the same. I don't know. But you've got to really think about what the purpose of that demo is for that particular time and that particular space, and what's going to work best in that sort of environment. Otherwise, you've got to be strategic about these things, I think. So, yeah.
What I'm very curious to find out is, how do you contact these conventions and Steam? How do you submit your game to these people to get their attention?
Yeah, so for me and guests, keeping it very local where I am, and yourself is in Western Australia. Perth Games Festival, for example, is run by a volunteer organisation called Let's Make Games, who do amazing things for the local games industry. Western Australia has a very tiny industry comparatively to everywhere else, but then we also have a tiny population. So it makes sense. We're very isolated, and also we have quite a high cost of living and high wages and that sort of thing. So we're not necessarily as attractive for big studios to produce a game here necessarily. I think that might change soon, because there has been a new tax rebate that's going to be introduced that might attract those bigger companies, which actually does absolutely nothing for indie developers, because you have to earn at least $500,000 per year to be able to qualify for that tax rebate. So great for big studios and people looking for a AAA job possibly, but for indie developers that are just trying to pay rent and put some noodles on the table, that's probably not going to do much for them and that sort of thing. But they're just they're a bunch of volunteers, game developers often themselves, that put on events. They do the Perth edition of Global Game Jam, and they did their own game jam just a week prior to Perth Games Festival called Spring Jam. And you just apply for it. You pay a small fee. Perth Games Festival is actually very cheap, really, compared to other things. And then pretty much as long as the game exists and you're a Western Australian developer, it will I assume get accepted, as long as you pay bills and you fill out all the forms and submit all your screenshots and stuff like that. Other conventions and that may be a bit different. I've been looking into PAX, and I feel like that might be a bit more selective. I haven't fully looked into that process myself, but that could be possibly a bit more selective, and could be just to have a certain level of standard of games and that for that. Because obviously PAX is a lot less grassroots, even though it's a very community feel for such a big production. It's probably my favorite convention in the world, but it's still a huge, it's one of the biggest conventions in Australia. So I don't know, don't quote me on that. It could be more selective process, but I mean, most events, conventions, whatever's going to continue after all of this sort of COVID stuff, usually we'll give a call out, probably charge a fee in that and go for it. For online stuff, it's more of a submission-based thing. I don't think there's necessarily like a fee or anything like that, for something like Steam Next Festival and all the other online sort of demo festivals that really quite sprouted up quite a lot since COVID, in particular, because we haven't been able to do in-person conventions. So people have tried to virtualize that in different ways, and that could be just as simple as having a page on Steam with a bunch of demos that people can check out during that weekend or week of that online event. But some people have taken the next step. I think it's Indie Arena booth, which is like a sort of indie focused section of Gamescom in Germany. They actually create a whole virtual conference. So you actually it was almost like a little game itself. It was like this top down sort of isometric perspective, and you create your own avatar, and then you walked around to different game booths in it, and you could watch a trailer in there, you could download the demo from there and stuff like that. So it was quite a virtual experience, and I think there might have been some sort of social element to it. I don't know if it took off at all, but it was quite interesting to see how you could gamify that and take it to a virtual space. And then you does make you think of something like virtual reality. Can you imagine us doing conferences and conventions in virtual reality maybe in future? Like maybe that's like a little baby step towards creating something like that. So, but yeah, it's just, yeah, most events will have a call out thing. And it's, I guess, just trying to figure out when those call outs are. Like, for example, on my Trello, I've got a list of events and the dates that they run and that sort of thing. So I know I've got to start looking out for when they're going to do call outs for something so that I can submit to something. And some of it's timing based as well. That's the desperation of trying to stand out on a platform. Is like, you're going to try anything you can, I guess, for some people, because like on Steam alone, there's like 10,000 games released every single year. And I'm not just pulling a number out of nowhere. There literally was 10,000 games. I think it was over 20, I think it was 2019. I think we were down a bit on 2020, but 2019, there was like over 10,000 games released on Steam alone, let alone all the other platforms. And that means there's about 200 games coming out each week. So that means when you release your game that week, you have to hope that you're that one game or two games that stands out of the 200 different games that come out that week. How are you going to stand out somehow? And I guess, yeah, doing events and releasing demos, and that is one way to hopefully get people interested in your game so that they wish listed or start following your social media pages or whatever, so that they get that game when it comes out, which helps your exposure on the day when you release as well.
All right, well, let's see if we can get Courier Tale to get some exposure. Tell us all about Courier Tale. When did you start making it? What was your inspiration for making it? And also, what program do you use to make it in?
Yeah, well, I think the program is an interesting one because it's like almost like a dirty secret sort of thing. Like, I for many years tried different game engines. I've been trying to get into game development for years and years now. And as I don't code, I can't really code. I've tried many times. It just doesn't seem to work for me. But I struggled with many game engines, even though they had different like visual scripting languages and stuff like that. But I spent many years trying to really make games in Unity, and I've got multiple game projects that are in Unity that I feel could be potential full games, but I just hit a roadblock most of the time technically. I know there was one project that I felt like I had to get like a script really right for that to go ahead with that game idea, otherwise it might be really cheesy or cringy and that sort of thing. So I kind of put that onto the back burner for writing reasons, actually. But most of the time it's like I hit some sort of technical brick wall and I thought, oh man, I just can't seem to make a game. But it feels like I kind of like jumped a step in a way, sort of thing, by going straight to something like Unity, which is a lot more technical, has a lot more flexibility. You can do a lot more in something Unity. You can get to more platforms than that. And I hope to one day use something like Unity again. But yeah, I was just really struggling after many projects just hitting brick walls, and not so much from a creative perspective, but more so from a technical perspective. And then I participated in a game jam, which I've done many game jams over the years trying to get into game development.
What is a game jam, for those who don't know?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Like sometimes you forget that like the lingo you use might not be common for other people from different fields and that sort of thing. A game jam is basically a limited amount of time you have to make a game. Usually you'll be given a theme, and usually it'll probably be like 2 to 3 days, but sometimes jams can go for a month or something like that. Basically, usually given a theme, everyone that's signed up for the game jam then makes a game based on that theme. Sometimes it can be solo, like online sort of game jams like Ludum Dare, for example, are often a lot more solo based because people are doing it remotely online. But something like Global Game Jam is more of an in-person, on-site sort of game jam. So you're more likely to do a collaboration with multiple people, make a little miniature game development studio over the weekend and make a game quickly and that sort of thing. So you've got this time limit, you've got a theme, and you've got to make something within that time. And it doesn't have to, I feel like one of the downsides with game jams now, I feel like that people expect that you're supposed to come out with this polished, finished game, and that it's so bizarre because some games can take up to 10 years to make in reality, but some people have this sort of pressure. They feel like, oh, I've got to have this super polished, finished game with like perfect graphics and all this other stuff and that. And it's like, well, game jams should be about like trying to learn something new, maybe hooking up with some new people to maybe continue doing a project with later on, come up with new concepts that you might then take on to make a full game later on, which many games that you've probably played have probably started out as a game jam game. Many games like from Ludum Dare or Global Game Jam would have gone on to full releases. Well, they have. There definitely has been.
What I did notice on your website, the games that you have made public and are able to play, I played some of them, and what I'm about to say right now, I mean with absolutely no offense.
I know what you're going to say.
Okay, all right. Okay, what am I going to say?
They're very broken. A lot of them.
No,
they're very incomplete experiences.
I was going to say that they look like they were made as practice for a bigger project.
Yeah, totally. I feel like people get this sort of almost like anxiety that where they feel like, oh, well, we're going to be judged on this. Like, we've got to put out this polished product because I saw this game jam once and it looked like it was a completely finished game that someone worked on for like a year or something like that. And they managed to knock it out in a weekend. So I feel like there's this undue pressure. So I myself, try to go to a game jam with the idea that you could come out the weekend with a completely broken thing that does not work or it's not very good and that sort of thing. But it's about the learning process of that sort of thing. And hopefully that's, sparks something else, or maybe you continue to work it on and go, oh, in that last hour of the game jam, I thought of this idea that makes the game work, but I didn't have enough time to implement it. That's okay. There's no game jam police that come over and knock on your door and go, sorry, sir, are you still working on that game? And it was only supposed to be worked on over the weekend. No, I'm sure most game jam organizers hope that you're going to get like just this prototype together that just happens to slightly stick together, just like it's like if you were doing a physical version of it, it's just like a bunch of like MacGyver sort of parts. Like you've got some bubble gum and you've got like a hat and that, and you're just taping it all together. And hopefully it just gives you the idea of the concept. And then hopefully if there is some magic in there somewhere, if there's something that's just like, oh yeah, there's something there, then spend months on it, spend years on it maybe, and finish it off if you think it's really got legs on it. But don't expect necessarily that you have to come out with a super polished demo at the end of a weekend, because it's a massive ask. I did this jam called Sam Jam. I knew it was going to be RPG Maker based because it was being organized by the developers of one of my favorite games. The developer's called Vagabond Dog, and they make a game called Always Sometimes Monsters. And it's pretty bizarre because like they're Canadian developers. I'm based in Australia. And I remember when I used to work at a particular place, me and a friend had played this game, and we always used to talk about Always Sometimes Monsters because it has these amazing choice and consequence mechanics in it. And we just always talked about it. And it was weird that later on I found a developer on Twitch, and then started talking to them on Twitch about their game and that sort of thing and that. And then next thing you know, that they're organizing this jam based on the sequel to that game called Sometimes Always Monsters, which the shorthand version of that is Sam. So the jam was called Sam Jam. And what they did was they actually gave you assets from Sometimes Always Monsters, not the full project or anything, but they gave you a bunch of assets as an RPG Maker sort of project, and then you had to make a game using those assets. There wasn't really any theme, I don't think. It was just like, here's the assets, make a game in a weekend or something like that. And I'd only slightly dabbled in RPG Maker previously, but I was at this point where I had been experimenting with other game engines to see if there was another game engine that I was just going to get and I was able to make something complete in. And then I did the Sam Jam, and because I didn't have to do the graphics and that, I could just focus on the writing and the making this go from here to there, and being able to walk through a door or something like that, or make something happen. I worked out how to use that because it's really accessible software, accessible to the point that people often say bad things about games that are made in RPG Maker. So that's why I'm always apprehensive about saying, oh yeah, the game's made in RPG Maker. But what I realize is, like, it doesn't matter what you use to make something with, as long as it allows you to make what you want to make. And what I do, and that's what same with Vagabond Dog does with their games, I'm trying to make a game in RPG Maker, but I'm trying to make it not look like an RPG Maker game as much as possible. So I had multiple people say at Perth Games Festival not picking up what the game engine was, even though a lot of the people were game developers themselves, would be aware of RPG Maker, but they'll go, oh, what game engine is this in? And I'll go, RPG Maker, and I go, oh, all right, really? And I have that because I streamed the whole game on Twitch. I developed the whole game on Twitch. I have people come in and they go, oh, this is RPG Maker. And it's like, there's a stereotype about RPG Maker games is because the game engine is built around being really accessible so that even kids can use it and that sort of thing. It has a whole bunch of assets already there for you, like all these traditional JRPG sort of fantasy graphics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I did that when I was in high school. When I used to visit my friend's house, and we used to make crappy little 6-second games with little anime characters. So yeah, I'm surprised as well that you use RPG Maker because it's old, therefore it's bad.
Yeah, well, it's old and it hasn't aged gracefully. Like the latest version of RPG Maker added like 3 new basic features that should have been just like a free update, but they wanted like you to buy this whole new software. But hey, it's quite cheap actually compared to anything else, really, especially with people charging subscriptions these days. But it is quite archaic.
Because Game Maker Studio, too, they've
just gone down the subscription. Yeah.
Because that's the one that I have. That's the one that I use, and I haven't touched it because I haven't paid a subscription for it. But now that they're saying that you have to do it, I'm like, if I do anything with it, will that sort of activate the subscription? So I'm sort of scared.
Yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's the nature of like the software industry as a whole. Ever since Adobe went down that path, and like just have been, I feel, very exploitative of their users in that respect in subscriptions. All other companies are gradually coming around to that idea. And I think with, the normalization of subscriptions with things like music services and TV and all that sort of thing, I think software companies are going, well, we could just keep asking for money from people forever, couldn't we? And if they stop paying us, then they can't open their projects or their creations anymore. So they have to keep paying us continuously. While previously it used to be with software, the developers had to actually give you a reason to want to pay an upgrade fee to the next version and that sort of thing. So unfortunately, more and more companies are going down that path. And Game Maker Studio, unfortunately, is the latest one, which is sad because now I kind of almost cross that off as an engine that I won't necessarily consider swapping to in future, because I think, well, now I know, like I own Game Maker Studio too. So I think, make a game in Game Maker Studio and still export that to, I think, PC and Mac and Linux or something like that. But if I want to do pretty much any other platform, I have to pay a subscription fee now. And it's like, I'm so anti-subscription fee for software. I think software is very different to something like music or even games and other things, which are like a one-time experience often sometimes, or just a temporary experience in that. But software is something that you want to know that in 5 years' time, I can go back to a project and reopen something up without having to think, I have to pay $40 this month just to open up this project to just like change one file or something like that. Like it's a pretty predatory sort of practice, I feel. But RPG Maker, for all of its faults and limitations, they just ask you up for a fee up front, and it's often on sale as well, and you don't owe them any royalties. Like Unreal Engine will charge you a royalty, though you do have to earn $1 million to pay their 5% royalty. So for most indie developers, that's never going to be a problem that they have to pay any money. If you just take the existing assets of RPG Maker and just make yet another turn-based battling game where you just go around fighting monsters one after another and like have some maybe some dialogue in between, then you're probably not going to attract much audience outside of that RPG Maker sort of following sort of thing. There is quite a almost like cult-like following of RPG Maker games. The RPG Maker developers play other RPG Maker games sort of thing. But on a commercial, more mainstream sense of like games that get released on Steam and other platforms and that, there's games you can see everything about it has been done custom. all the graphics, all the sound and everything, all the writing and everything like that. So, and then probably the most recent example of a successful RPG Maker game is Amari, which I haven't actually played yet. But that game has, I think, like 10 or 20,000 reviews on Steam, which is so many reviews. Like most indie games are lucky to get like 50 or 100 reviews and that sort of thing. Amari has tens of thousands of reviews. And so that can give you even a slightest indication of how many games have actually sold. And it's for good reason. You look at the artwork in that. And yes, while it is chibi pixel art graphics, kind of like RPG Maker graphics are a bit, they're very custom. They're very got a style to them. The artwork, I think, is done by Omocat, who's like a sort of visual artist that does like a lot of artwork and that sort of thing. You can sense that style, and there's so much effort. And the game was worked on for years. It wasn't something they knocked out over a weekend or a month. It was something they worked on for years and years. And you can see the effort in it, and you can understand why, that game's selling for like about 30 Australian dollars. So I think RPG Maker is a viable platform. You've just got to realize that if you want it to stand out from the rest of the games, you've got to do something to make it stand out. You've got to put the effort in it. And like, for example, Courier Tale, I've been working on that for a year now. And I'm probably going to be working on it for another year. So it's not something I'm just knocking out in a month or two and then going, okay, here's the game. So will that time be worth it? I don't know. We'll see. You just don't know. But I think people, like, what I was so surprised about demonstrating the game at Perth Games Festival was the positive feedback. I think people could recognize the effort that had gone into it, sort of thing. Like, which is interesting because on the surface level, you look at it and the graphics kind of look quite basic and really minimal and that sort of thing. But that's a particular style I've gone for, with chunky pixel art and minimalist sort of visuals and stuff like that, and a particular color palette in that. But that's also what kind of helps make it stand out, is like, say, the color palette alone makes it kind of stand out from all the color games, sort of thing, because there's suddenly this quite high contrast, bold sort of game that's alongside all the other things. Like, if you think you're scrolling through your Steam and looking at like 100 different games and just scrolling through, what stands out to you, you've got to do something about your game to make it stand out. And if your game, like, here's an RPG Maker game and you're making another JRPG that looks exactly the same as the original assets that RPG Maker give you, and you're not doing your own custom assets in your own particular art style, or whoever your artist is, then it's going to be a lot harder to stand out, I think. And that's the biggest challenge for not just game creators now, with the just absolute floodgates opening for indie developers these days, but it's a challenge for everyone in creative life now, that if you want to stand out, the great thing about digital technology is it's democratized creativity. It means you don't have to have a whole lot of money to necessarily do anything. Like, you can like do graphics on some free software on a crappy little laptop sort of thing and make artworks that are really nice. And you don't have to have a lot of money for it. But if you had to keep buying paint supplies all the time and buying new canvases all the time, that's actually a really costly way. So digital technology has massively democratized creativity. But the downside of that is that means, because everyone's being creative these days, we can all do it. And I have nothing against that. That's awesome. But the problem is, then how do you stand out amongst everyone else? How do you get people's attention? And it's not so much about trying to compete with other people, but it's about trying to get your voice for your project to your audience. And not everything's mainstream. Everyone's going to have their own little audiences. And I often talk about that people should be thinking internationally and not thinking locally. And that if you're making something more niche, like I would say my game is quite niche, that maybe you have in your local area 10 people that are interested in it, but maybe there's 20 people in Tokyo that are interested, and 40 people in Norway, and 10 people in USA, and between all those people together, you build an audience internationally rather than, I think back to my music days more so, where you can often get quite focused on your local area and think, oh yeah, my audience is people in Western Australia, in Perth, especially being so isolated like Perth. It's very hard for you to go on tour like you would like in Europe or the United States, where you can just drive down the road and you're in another state or country. Here, Western Australia itself is the size of most countries or bigger, sort of thing, and there's not much in between there, sort of thing. So from a music industry point of view, you often were thinking, oh well, I've got to get an audience in Perth because that is my audience. But nowadays, with online, that you're not even, maybe a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of younger people in particular, don't even think about the idea of playing a gig at your local club or pub or something like that. They're just thinking, oh, how do I get onto Spotify and get onto some playlist or something like that? Or if you're making a game, or how do I get my game played by that top streamer or something like that? Because you're thinking about the worldwide audience for your content rather than just what's locally performed as such in person and that.
You say that your game is niche, but as soon as you mentioned, is it Omari, that game with the little cartoon boy? As soon as I haven't played it, but I know of it because it was made famous by people on YouTube coming up with like original custom songs for it. Do you have a little bit of a wish that Courier Tale or any of your future projects will reach that sort of mimetic Bendy and the Ink Machine, Five Nights at Freddy's sort of fame?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think anyone that says otherwise would be lying. Everyone wants what they're working on to be successful, and in fact, I probably really need Courier Tale to do somewhat okay to continue on in the way that I'm producing this, because I'm kind of trying to self-fund myself to almost work on this full-time sort of thing. I'm doing a little bit of work on the side, but right now I'm trying to, there's some point in your life where you just go, okay, you got to invest in yourself and you just got to go for it and really say, okay, this is an actual thing. The likelihood of having any success at all, even paying for your Steam fee for putting your game on the Steam page might not even get covered. Who knows? You just don't know. Actually, I just saw an interview someone just today, I think it was saying like all you can control is your process of making the thing. You can't control what the result is. So focus on that process and making sure it's a good experience for yourself in that. Because you could sell one copy, you could sell 1 million copies. You don't know until it's released. Some games that just get absolute cult status and sell ridiculous numbers, you just look at them sometimes and go, why? How? Like, there's no necessary logic. People like to think logic and go, oh, well, this genre is popular right now. Battle Royale games are popular right now. We've got to make a Battle Royale game. But you might have already missed that boat because someone's already made that popular game in that genre. So it's often people finding like some hole in the market, some hole in what people are searching for. Look at something like Stardew Valley. That game was something that the developer worked on for like 4 years or so, put a lot of effort into it. But what they did was they tapped into this sort of wanting that people that didn't have, say, a Nintendo console and played Harvest Moon never got to play a little charming pixel art farming simulator before, sort of thing. So if just happened to either purposely or accidentally stumble upon this great need that people wanted to play that on a platform that wasn't exclusive to Nintendo, so you don't know. And I think any indie game developer would hope that their game is financially successful enough to not only hopefully pay for the costs that you spent making it in the first place, but more so give you a buffer so you can make your next game. And that's the same from like a solo indie developer to a AAA studio with 3,000 people. If the current game is successful, then they can make their next game and with the money that they've made there, and they don't have to worry about how they're going to pay the bills when they're making the next game. And I'm sure there's some indie developers that struck gold and they're set up for life and they don't even have to make another game really, but now they can make it and just have complete freedom and not have to worry about, oh, how do I pay for my mortgage? How do I pay for my rental or food or whatever sort of thing. And I think that's kind of what you've got to think about it. The chances of you having a success, whether it's in games or any other probably digital creative sort of thing, is so low. It's so ridiculously low. Because as I said, 10,000 games on Steam in 1 year. How many of those games do you remember actually being what you'd class as successful in that year? Probably 100 maybe, and that's probably being generous. How many actually paid for their bills out of those 10,000 people, maybe at max, maybe 1,000 or something like that, 10% even.
How many were bought at all?
Yeah, exactly. Like, because it's not, you can make the best game in the world, you can make the best any creative thing in the world, but if no one knows about it, then that's it. That's the end of the story for that. But, and then you can have just totally weird things where you look at something like Among Us, came out, like, I think it was 2018, and then just went viral in 2020 out of nowhere. And so they possibly, I don't know the full story of that, I haven't played Among Us or anything like that, but I imagine they probably released it, go, oh, well, I guess not many people are interested in this. I guess we better start working on the next game or whatever. I don't know what the story is. But can you imagine you release something in 1 year and go, oh, man, no one's really buying this. I guess this is the end of my game developing career. And then 2 years later becomes one of the biggest games in the world. Like you just can't plan for that sort of thing. So you've also got to plan for I think that tail end. A lot of developers talk about having that tail end and that maybe producing extra content for things to try and not just think that you have to hit hard and be big in that first launch week. It's also, I think, about that tail end thing that hopefully your game keeps selling for years to come. Part of the reason why we do have a flood of indie games is because it has been democratized. Because when I was a kid, I didn't even think about, there's people that make these games that I play. Like, you didn't even think about that then. And now, like I just told you about a story that someone who makes a game on the other side of the world, I was able to talk to online through Twitch about their game and then participate in a game jam that they did. It's completely different sort of dynamic now, sort of thing. And you realize, oh, wait, I could make games. And I realized that only like about 10 years ago, sort of thing, go, oh, maybe I could make games. I've loved games for decades, yet I haven't even thought about the concept of actually making them. And when it combines all the things that I'm interested in, like I've done music, I like writing, I like doing visual art stuff and that sort of thing, all those things combine to make something like a game. So I thought, well, why can't I make it myself? But because it is much more accessible now, and people realize when you grow up as a kid that you can go to become a game developer. You can go to a school and learn how to do game development and study it and stuff. Like, people come out with stars in their eyes, likely, and thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to go off and, work for Naughty Dog, or I'm going to go make, a massive MMO by myself or something like that. And it's going to be successful because I saw Indie Game the movie and those guys made hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, or, and that's not the reality for 99% of, not only games, but most creative endeavors. We like to celebrate these success stories that sound like, oh yeah, just one person made this game and then they made millions of dollars, or, something amazing like Hollow Knight that was made in Adelaide by 2 people in that, and likely sold millions of dollars in that and probably set them up for life.
When's Silk Song coming out? Haven't they been advertising that for like a year and a half? It's so weird.
Well, it's interesting because, like, saying like that, the success stories, for every one success stories, there's probably 10,000, a million people that didn't have that success story. It's no different to, like, was watching the Olympics recently and you think about, we celebrate the person who got the gold medal, but we forget about everyone else. The people that didn't. For that one person that got the gold medal, there was 10 people in that race that didn't get that gold medal, and then there was thousands that didn't even get to the Olympics, no matter how much they tried and that sort of thing. But Silk Song is an interesting thing because I think it's kind of like when, like, a band had a successful debut album and that sort of thing, and then there's that pressure to go, oh wow, we made this game that's like critically acclaimed, like people absolutely love it, and now we have the money and time to make the game like a sequel or the next game and that. And man, the pressure for that is like a totally different pressure to, like, oh, I'm using my savings to make my first game and I hope it hits because otherwise I'll be broke. This is the opposite thing where it's like, oh man, people are expecting this and this and this. And what happens, like, how maybe you only strike gold once. How can you make another Hollow Knight? How can you make something as good as Hollow Knight? Now, I have no problem. I'm sure Hollow Knight 2 Silk Song is going to be amazing. Hollow Knight, the original, was amazing. So I have no doubt that they'll comfortably make a great game. But the problem is when you hit that sort of high peak, it's like the old-fashioned saying on showbiz, you can only go down. Once you hit the top, you can only go down. So, you're basically like treading water, trying to stay up and go, oh, yep, I'm still doing awesome. But, that's a big ask out of people, I sometimes wonder if people have that one amazing idea And then it's hard to replicate that success. So you got to give credit to people that can keep churning out hit after hit. You know, if you look at something like, I think it Supergiant Games, who made like Hades and Pyre and Bastion and Transistor. Like each one of those games has progressively been more successful than the last in some ways and increase their quality each time. That's really hard to do. And I could not imagine the pressure. Like, just imagine, let's say Courier Tale becomes this cult hit and sells really well and does amazing. And I think, oh man, I can make my next game easily. I can work on it full time. Maybe I can even hire someone else to work on with me or something like that, you know. And then but then you're like, oh, but what do I do now? You know, and I think that's the thing for anyone doing anything creative, whether it's had success or not, is like you're always constantly thinking of ideas. And that's probably the hardest thing with game development. It's such a long process that you have to try and stay focused on that one idea without getting distracted and go, oh, maybe I can make a different game instead. That's the hardest thing to not do. Constantly thinking new ideas or thinking, oh, maybe this game isn't the game I should be focusing on. Maybe I should work on something else. Because if it doesn't hit, oh man, I might not have that second chance, you know? Yeah, I think that's the biggest, you know, you go in that sort of any sort of creative project, you go on that constant, you're going up that mountain constantly, and then you get to that peak and it's the release or the performance or whatever it is of that project, you know, and you hit that peak and then it's like, oh, like the mountain goes down on the other side, and then you've got to work out how you're going to get yourself back up again in some ways, you know, because, you know, you've got to think of what do I do next? And we often have ideas of what to do next, but then you can almost get that sort of choice paralysis sort of thing where it's like, okay, you finish your game, you're done. And it's like, okay, now what next? Oh, well, we've got 10 different ideas. Which one's going to be the one we pick to focus on for the next 2 years of our lives? I mean, that's what people don't, I think, realize this in particular for game development, is that people are dedicating like maybe a half a decade sometimes of their life. So in 1 decade, they might only make 1 or 2 or maybe 3 projects in that whole time. It's not like you're releasing it like in music where you can just like release a song every month or something like that. And it feels like you're doing something new and creative. And if you didn't really like the last one, well, who cares? I've got a new song coming out next month or something like that. But with a game, like you're saying, okay, for the next couple of years of my life, I'm dedicating myself to this one idea. Man, I better like it for 2 years or 3 years or whatever. I've got to stick to it. And I'm sure that's the same with, you know, other forms of creativity. You know, films in particular are quite notorious for being in developmental hell for years as far as getting a script together and then shopping it around and then getting someone bored to do it and stuff like that. But I think that's also one benefit of independent development of creative stuff, is that you don't have to necessarily ask someone's permission to go ahead with doing something. If you can find a way to self-fund it or do it in your spare time, and that you can be creative whenever you want. And once again, that's whole digital democratization of creativity really helps with that. You don't have to necessarily, you know, get a publisher on board to release a game. In fact, I remember watching a GDC talk by someone from Devolver, and the title of the talk was, you don't need a publisher. And they're a publisher trying to promote why you should kind of sign up. And they're basically saying, well, you don't need us, but if you do, hey, we're here, sort of thing, you know. Indie games are really tapping into a lot of interesting things. And, you know, as far as story goes, and telling stories of people that have traditionally been marginalized, you know, and increasing the diversity of game development, you know, telling stories like of all people, not just the same old story of some guy going around shooting some aliens, you know. There's better stories to be telling out there, and they're getting more and more out there thanks to games. And I think in some ways games, you know, we're, as I said earlier on, in a pioneering stages still in that, but I feel like at some point games are really going to be rivaling other platforms for having the best writing around, you know. And it'll be interesting to see whether we ever think of it like, you know, it's interesting, we've got the Game Awards, you know, which is kind of seen more so nowadays as the industry version of the Oscars, you know, that happens at the end of each year and that sort of thing. And it's interesting, like you won't see that shown on broadcast television on your like local TV station, that sort of thing. But of course you'll see the Oscars because you've got all the celebrities and all that sort of thing. But is artistically that content at the Oscars better than some amazing games? Not necessarily. And I think a lot of people don't realize the story experiences that are available in games. Because they just think of, oh, well, all games are just Call of Duty or something, they think, oh, that's games, isn't it? You just go around in Fortnite shooting people or something like that. They don't realize that, games have so many amazing stories in them, and they're so much more immersive in some ways because you're being part of that story, and you're maybe even directing that story. You're being a creator as part of that story because you're making maybe choices. Like I was talking about choice and consequence games, some like Always Sometimes Monsters, or on the more polished, or not polished, more bigger budget, I should say, version, some like Detroit Become Human, where there's like 44 different endings. And each scene that you go through has like 6 or so different ways you could go through that thing. And I've once gone through a whole scene in the 6 different ways, and they can result in totally different storylines and different characters dying or something like that. So, there's that, it's almost like, I feel like games are going to take storytelling to that next level in some ways, that like traditional linear media doesn't necessarily do, but was obviously flirted with things like Choose Your Own Adventure books, or like Netflix doing the interactive TV specials and stuff like that. So, and I think we're constantly refining that craft over the years and getting better and better. So I think unlike, say, if you read a book from 20, 50 years ago, you'd think, oh yeah, that's still an amazing achievement of writing and that sort of thing. But if you look back at a game from 20 years ago and look at the writing of that, it probably doesn't compare as well as, a recent and amazing story game, because we've gone better at it, because books have been around for centuries, but games have not, in the sort of storytelling sense, So, so I think we're really going to see more and more people pushing story in games and realizing the opportunities within the platform to tell stories through gaming in ways that you can't necessarily do in other mediums. And that's not to be detrimental to those other mediums. They all have their place. But I think games, offers this new goldmine of opportunity of how we can tell stories to people.
What I did see around your booth at the Games Festival were schools, universities, advertising courses in game development. As someone who didn't study game development in any sort of academic sense, would you recommend that someone go to those courses and learn in a professional sense to start making games?
I think for anything, regardless if it's games or not, everyone's got a different path, way to getting to their success. Not everyone necessarily does well in a traditional learning perspective, and that's no disrespect to traditional learning sort of places. Like my partner is actually a teacher in high school, so I know all about that, and I've taught workshops for various things in different art things and stuff like that over the years. Because some people will go to the highest levels of university and become very successful in what they've studied, while other people are high school dropouts and become the next tech billionaire. So I think there's no one path. I think you've got to go with what works with you and try out different things to find your way to get to that result. I mean, specifically to games, I have studied a little bit of game development. I didn't do the full-time course of it, but I just studied some select modules. Just so I thought, oh, well, I'm struggling to really learn this stuff, like you learning Unity or whatever and that sort of thing. Maybe if I go study a few game design modules, that will help me out in that. And I would say I came out of that process not necessarily any the wiser. But that might be a symptom of me not doing the full course and not really doing the whole experience in that. I think studying game development, part of the experience would be actually just getting into the same room as other people that want to do the same things. And maybe you'll meet someone that go, hey, want to start a studio together and make a game together and make Hollow Knight, or something like that, So it can be as much networking as it is maybe necessary learning any skills. I think if you're just coming straight out of high school and you're looking at what you want to study after that, then sure, consider game development. But when I was coming out of high school, game development wasn't something that was on offer. And if you actually look at a lot of legendary sort of game developers, none of them studied anything to do with game development, because game development courses didn't exist. Some of them might have studied something like computer science or like traditional art and that, and then they've taken those skills and transplanted them into the game development world. But I often hear people that are successful at games development say, oh, you don't have to go do game development course to learn, especially now, like you can just go onto YouTube or whatever and you'll find hundreds, if not thousands of tutorials online for free. If you've got money, there's online courses you can do and stuff like that. But honestly, the best thing you can do, I think, and I say this as someone who's still, quite inexperienced as far as game development goes and hasn't actually released the full game quite yet. Hopefully that will happen in the next year with Courier Tale. But the best thing you can do is make the game, make your games. When you actually, if you're like someone trying to get a job at a AAA studio or something like that, they'll say, oh yeah, do you have a computer science degree or have you studied game development? And people, there's so many people coming out of these game development courses, and especially in somewhere like Western Australia, it's kind of to no jobs because there's no studios around necessarily that can hire anyone. So each year there's probably like 50, 100 people that graduate from different uni courses or take courses locally and that, but there's not 100 game development jobs going in Western Australia. And that's just a simple, realistic fact of the industry. So I feel like these courses should actually be preparing people less so for that AAA dream that some people have, like going to work for, some big company like Nintendo or whatever, or Ubisoft. But instead, prepare them for the actual real reality. And I think that actually relates to most creative sort of study and that sort of thing. Teach people how to run a business. Teach people how to do marketing, teach people how to use an Excel spreadsheet, teach people how to write media release, all the business stuff, because the creative stuff, you hopefully have that within you already and you'll learn it by doing it. And a lot of the big AAA title sort of developers, I think, are often looking not so much like what qualifications you got on your resume, but they want you to show a demo of something you made. You've done a game jam, you've made a demo. Let's see if you can actually make something, if you're more focused on a specific field like 3D modeling or something like that, show us your portfolio of 3D models, because who cares if you passed or not passed some art course or whatever sort of thing, or even studied anything at all. If someone comes in to apply for a job at some big studio, one person passed like some amazing university course that's well regarded and costs tens of thousands of dollars in that, but has nothing really to show in their portfolio. But someone who just went straight out of high school and had been like making their own stuff in their own time and shows a big portfolio of all the things they've done, who's going to get hired? Most of the time, it's going to be the person that can prove that they can actually do the thing done, that they haven't just learnt the theory of it, they've actually done it. And if you can show someone some polished sort of demo of something that relates to the sort of job you're going for, and that's going to show more than anything, because like you can show a piece of paper, but that piece of paper doesn't do the job for you. Once you get in to do that job, you've got to do it. With the indie side of things, I think you even got even more reason to just do it, just start making games, and like the amount of money that you might have spent on that course, say, you could spend on investing in yourself to, work on a game, not having to like necessarily complete a module to do this particular project. Like they say, this unit is all about making a Frogger clone or something like that, or making a platformer, but maybe you're not interested in making those games. Couldn't you be better spending your time trying to make the sort of game that you want to make instead? So I think everyone's going to have a different path. And as I said, if you're young and you're just coming out of high school or something like that, and you want to study something afterwards and that, then I'd say go for it. But if you're older and you just want to transition into game development, like I am trying to do, I think just go for it. There's so many resources out there. There's so many different platforms and ways. There's so much forums and help around and that sort of thing. You can go onto Twitch streams and watch people live and ask them a question on, sometimes I'll stream my game development under the RPG Maker category on Twitch. So I'll often get other people that do RPG Maker come into my stream. And so when I get stuck on something, I'll go, oh, yeah, you just have to do this. And it's like, okay, cool. And then I'll fix the problem. And it's like right there, live feedback. Someone's told me how to fix the problem, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think it's not a necessity, both from my own experience, but also from what I've heard other people that are much more qualified than me to say these things. Because, in the past, you didn't need to. You didn't do it. Often you hear the stories of those people working on games in the 80s or 90s, and they're essentially just like punks. They're just gone in there. They didn't have any experience, and then go, oh, make a game. Okay, I guess we've got to make it and figure out how to do it. And, because that's game development in general. You can be super qualified to make a game, like coding or whatever you do. But there's a reason why it takes multiple years, is because you're figuring out how to make that game over time. What you make in that first week of making that game is not the same thing it is in 2 years' time or something like that. Because, if you look at something like Into the Breach, they've talked about, the developers behind that talked about they iterated on that game like multiple times. They threw out like whole versions of the game like multiple times until they got to the point where it's like, oh, this is the game. Okay, now we're into full production in that. And I think that's what people have to realize, in particular for game development in particular, but probably similar to other creative platforms as well, is that it's a very iterative. I always struggle with that word. You have to iterate constantly to get to that end point. And I'm finding that myself in my game right now. Like just a couple of days ago, I had just this epiphany, like, oh man, I just realized these two characters I have in these buildings in this particular part of the game, I actually have to throw those characters completely out because they're supposed to be a different type of character to serve this overall story, which I know is very vague, but I'm trying not to give anything away in that. But like I could have gone ahead with just having those two characters sitting there doing their thing and that, but then I realized, oh wait, they don't serve the purpose of the overall game. I've got to change it. And that's very much a storytelling thing often, is that like good script writers and stuff like that often will talk about like, oh, everything has to serve the story, the narrative, or whatever sort of thing, and so everything should be there for a purpose. You don't just chuck in something for randomly. And while games kind of have to fill things with a bit of random stuff, like filler stuff a bit more, because you're creating a whole world, you're not creating this tunnel vision of like a story through a book or a linear directed film and that sort of thing. So you might be creating a whole world, and you've got to create everything around it. Not every tree has a purpose, to an extent, but it's got to have some sort of purpose for existing. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting the player's time. And I guess this comes back to that idea of respecting people's time, respecting the player's time, not wasting their time just for the sake of, oh, here's more content. Walk through a forest of 1,000 trees just so you've got an extra hour of gameplay. But if it's not serving any purpose, what's the point? And like a game that I'm playing right now, and it's possibly my game of the year at this point, Sable, that just came out a couple of days ago. It's like a miniature Zelda Breath of the Wild, massive open world on an indie scale sort of thing. It's an amazing game, and you can just go around exploring everywhere and just chill out and just climb things and do whatever you want to an extent. But it also is respecting the player's time, because it's realized, okay, you've already traveled this area. Now, you might like just the chill factor of going around on your hover bike and traveling from one point to another point whenever you feel like it. But if you don't want to have to worry about that, you can just fast travel to the next section. If you just want, go onto the map, click there, and you're instantly there, and you don't have to travel all the way back, because it's not respecting the player's time. And it's not necessarily adding anything to the overall design of that person's experience, And I think that's the thing also with game development, with storytelling, and just games in general, is that compared to maybe other platforms of creativity, games can have the opportunity to really tailor and curate their experience to that particular player. When you watch a film, when you read a book, that's very much the director's vision, and there's nothing that can change about it. It's static. That's it. But you go into a world of a game, and if it's got certain emergent gameplay features, if it's got features about design that, depending on what the player does, different things will happen. That means different people have different experiences. So when you go to work on Monday and everyone's watched like the last episode of Game of Thrones, everyone's got an opinion of it, but they all had virtually the same experience because they all got told exactly the same story. But if you played Sable or whatever game you're playing at the time over the weekend, and other people played that, and then you go on Monday into work or whatever, and you go to talk around the water cooler and talk about the games you played over the weekend, and you played both the same game, you could have had a completely different experience. Like I said, with Detroit Become Human or Always Sometimes Monsters, you could have gone down totally different pathways. And it's like, oh man, I came across this and that. I was like, what? I didn't see that at all. Like, I never saw that. What the hell was that? Now I've got to go back and replay the game or change what I was doing to try and see what this other person experienced. And maybe they experienced that because the game tailored itself to that person's experience. And while my game is a bit more limited on the scope of that sort of thing, I am trying to design it around the expectation that some people might just want to mainline it and just go through, get the main story points and that, and just do the main quests, if you will. They're called jobs in Courier Tale because you're a courier. You're not in a fantasy RPG, so they're jobs, not quests. And you can do those main jobs, and maybe you can knock out the game in 2 hours or something like that, and then enjoy it and give it a positive review and then refund it. But I've also got all this optional stuff as well, which is, of course, a trait of games, having side quests or side jobs in Courier Tale. And yeah, so some people might just go, oh yeah, I've knocked out that game in 2 hours. Like, it was really short, and yeah, it was kind of an interesting story. But maybe the people that do the side quests met all these new interesting characters and go, oh man, I met this character, and it's like, oh, I didn't see them around. And then that's because they had different experiences, because someone wanted to really immerse themselves in the world and have a long experience, while another person wanted, like, hey, I've got 2 hours spare, I've got to focus on the main story, and that's my experience in that. So the player has a bit of direction on the experience that they have in some games, which is something I don't think most other creative forms necessarily have that option, because they're already set in stone. It's not a playground like games have. So not all games obviously like that. A lot of them are very much a linear experience, and most people will have the same sort of experience. But even like multiplayer games, and I think that's why multiplayer games have been quite popular in some ways, is that people will talk about the experiences they've had because it's come from emergent gameplay where like things have just happened because people are controlling all the characters. It's not a bunch of AI. It's like people who are unpredictable what they're going to do. And it's like, oh yeah, I jumped off this building and glided down to this, and then I shot this and done that. And it's like, oh, how'd you do that? Like, that's a different experience to mine. And you don't get that when you've just watched the last episode of Game of Thrones. You've just got an opinion of it. But you still saw, this person do that, and everyone saw exactly the same thing. I went onto a Twitch stream once to see, like, there was a new Pokemon game that came out. And I thought, oh, let's just check this out. And I went into the stream, and it was just grass, and you saw nothing but grass, and you could just, I think, maybe see the player's head just outside the grass, and there was nothing happening. The streamer wasn't talking. It was just pretty much stagnant. I thought, oh, maybe they walked away from the control, and I just kind of tried to go, oh, how are you finding this game? And then they're like, oh, I've been here for 4 years waiting, not 4 years, who knows, 4 hours waiting for a shiny Pokemon to arrive, or something like. And I don't know much about Pokemon, but I was like, oh man, this ain't for me.
So as a games developer that doesn't include arcadey things in your games, not yet anyway, no loot boxes yet.
Oh yeah, my next game is just going to be just one big loot box, and you just open up, and then it says, hey, give me $20, and you can open up another one of these boxes.
Well, I have to right now ask the last question, which is always the last question that I ask here. And as a games developer that focuses on stories, at least in specifically Courier Tale, why do you think that stories in general are important?
Well, I mean, of course, there's just the purely entertainment value of it. I think a lot of people engage with stories for the entertainment value. If you're talking in a sort of fictional sense, at least, it's often that. Though I do hate, there was this quote from someone from Nintendo that said, games should be fun. And I totally disagree with that. Games or any content should be engaging. Like, you can play the most darkest, horrible game, that makes you just feel bad about yourself. But if that's a creatively, artistically meaningful experience and it was engaging that whole time, then that's just as fun, as as important as a game as going around jumping on mushrooms as a plumber known as Mario. Just because a game is fun doesn't mean it's a better game than something that isn't fun. I wouldn't call The Last of Us fun.
I was thinking of that as an exact example. Like, that's a game that isn't necessarily fun, but it's engaging.
It tells a story, that is really generally well done and has some good messages along the way, is stuff and interesting concepts and stuff like that. But it's in no way fun. No way fun.
I have to ask, what did you think about Joel getting his head bashed in with a golf club? Spoilers.
Yeah, we're probably gonna get away with those spoilers now. I wasn't as attached to that situation as other people. And I think there was a certain section of the internet that just grabbed onto that as a way to, gatekeep what gaming can be about. And I really hate that gatekeeping in that of what gaming can be about. I actually think the person who actually committed such a crime, Naughty Dog done an amazing job. Like, I have massive criticisms of that game, but there's also unbelievably brilliant things about Last of Us Part 2. But one of the most brilliant things is they totally flip it on you halfway through the game without giving away too much spoilers. And man, that move is so good to the point that I more so sympathized and preferred and liked the character who actually killed Joel. And I thought that character was amazing in the end. And some of her experiences, like in particular, they depict a scene where she's afraid of heights. It shows her experiencing being afraid of heights, like having vertigo in that. And they do that so well. And like, that was that was to me masterful storytelling. In fact, in ways, I feel like The Last of Us Part 2 in particular let the game get in the way of the story there, because I dreaded every time I had to go around shooting a bunch of other zombies and stuff like that. And I just was doing it purely to get to that next story beat, and next scene, because the dialogue and the character animations and all that rivals films and TV and that. It's such high quality stuff. And it's going to be interesting with the TV series that's coming out, whether that turns out, probably can hear my dog barking in the background. If that turns out to be actually a better platform for The Last of Us world and story, because I wonder sometimes because of how cinematic the Last of Us series is, I sometimes wonder if the game gets in the way of the story in that sense. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that translates to the TV screen. So yeah, I agree. Well, I agree with myself that games don't have to be fun. They have to be engaging. But as far as why I think stories are important, yes, there's the entertainment value, but I think there's a couple of factors. There's two things. One, it can give you an experience where you relate to a character. Like, it's quite often that people can feel like they're the only person that has that particular problem or thinks this way or something like that. And then when you see someone, even in a fictional universe, whether it's a game or TV show or theater production or whatever, you go, oh, wow, I relate to that character. That kind of gives some connection, some human connection. So I think there's that element in that. But then there's also the flip side of that, and I think that's more important than ever right now, as we more and more just put ourselves into silos and only surround ourselves with people that we agree with all the time and that. And I think that's how people get surprised when someone like Donald Trump gets elected and that sort of thing. And like all the left-wing people are like going, oh, how the hell did Donald Trump get elected? And it's like, well, because 70 million people or whatever voted for him, because you don't hang out with those people. So you don't even know those people exist. And I think one of the problems is you don't have to agree with people to try and understand their experience. You can completely disagree with them. You can think that they're doing terrible things. But what's great about storytelling is it helps us maybe experience the world through different eyes. And whether that's, someone that's just completely different to you, or someone that has a different agenda to you, or different sort of political perspective or whatever, or just a different life experience, due to whatever hardships that person has had. As long as you're open-minded enough to listen to content and read content and experience content that shows different perspectives, maybe you might learn a thing or two from that. And that's something you can't necessarily get in your normal life. because your experience is your experience, but some people have a completely different experience. And if that can be told in a story in some way, then maybe you'll be more compassionate to other people, or at least start to understand, oh, this is why that person thinks that way. This is why that person does that. I totally disagree with that, but maybe that's a symptom of whatever happened in their life that drove them to be the way that they are. Or, oh, wow, I didn't realize I had actually a really good life, but other people have a much worse life. And so every time you think, oh, I've got a hardship, oh, my life is sucks, this happened, that happens, that's all valid. But, other people might have quite more hardships than you. And that can help you, I think, put into perspective, like, where you stand in the world and how you relate to others. So I think that's why stories are also important. As long as people are willing to engage with those stories that aren't just a bunch of confirmation bias telling you exactly what you want to hear, then you can hopefully experience more of the world rather than just your little tiny corner of the world. And that's why I think stories can be important, is telling, in particular, the stories of those that don't have as much of a voice, in particular, that we don't hear from all the time. I think that's more and more becoming a thing that's becoming more prevalent. And that means that we realize, there's not just one person, type of person in the world. There's so many different cultures, so many different types of people in that, and different things going on. So yeah, I think stories are important for many reasons. And I think stories are in particular important for games going forward as a art form and a medium.
Yeah. And on that note, I just want to thank you for coming on to talk about stories and games.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for, I think, like, I checked out your other podcasts with other writers and that sort of thing. And yeah, thank you for thinking of games in that respect, I think, because I think as soon as we say the word writer, we think of, like, the book writer, someone writing a novel or writing a film script or something else in that. But I hope more and more we start thinking about people writing for games, and that's becoming a bigger thing. And if you are interested in writing for games, there's actually, and you're in Western Australia, there's actually a game writers group called The Page you can check out, which is run by Anthony Sweet, who actually wrote for Battlestar Galactica Deadlock and also the new Warhammer 40k game that was developed in Perth. So big properties in that. So he's done some amazing projects like that for writing in that, and he's got this group with some others that like meet to talk about writing for games. Because while you could probably join another writers group, there is something a bit different about writing for games that you have to consider. Like, you have to consider that the player might not do what you want them to do, so you've got to write for that as well. It's not like just a linear A to B script that you can just write necessarily on a page. You might have to have all these different pathways that you've got to write, and you've got to write the script almost 5 different ways or something like that if there's all these choices. So game writing is hopefully going to be recognized more and more, I hope, alongside all the traditional sort of writing out there. And recognizing the extra challenges and extra opportunities that it brings to artistic forms.